I don't want to be one of these self-important people on YouTube that says, I've had a lot of requests for such and such. But over the years, people at varying times have contacted me and asked me how to go about becoming a professional guitarist, whether that's studio work, touring work, musical theatre, all the various kind of avenues, teaching, all the various avenues you can go down when you're starting a career in music. Now, this isn't really a how-to because there isn't a set path. There aren't agencies out there anymore, as far as I'm aware. There used to be session agencies, but for the most part, they were pretty ineffective. And, a lot of this industry really does operate on word of mouth and reputation, and that is so important. So all I can really offer are a few kind of cautionary bits of advice. I'm going to frame it more as a what not to do scenario. So this is more really, how not to conduct yourself in the music industry. The first bit of advice I could really offer is the if you ever need a Dep scenario. It comes across quite crass and desperate and unbecoming if you friend request somebody, a professional guitarist that you know or have heard of, and then you write to them saying, "Hi, my name is blah blah blah. I don't know you from Adam, but if you ever need a Dep on such and such a gig, get in touch." I think from that point, you might have blown it with that person. Now, that sounds really harsh, but a lot of people subscribe to this if you don't ask, you don't get mentality. And I actually think sometimes if you do ask, you can make a nuisance of yourself. If you think about the person who you're asking to Dep for, the stranger, effectively, that you're asking a Dep for, they're not going to say, "Oh, well, I was going to ask my mate Dave, who I've known for 20 years, but, I've had a friend request from this guy from Bristol. He's got a quad Cortex and a PRS, so he must be good." They need to have heard you play. You need to kind of know this person in some sort of capacity. That does sound really harsh, but I would say it's quite unbecoming to do that. Also, if you are studying at one of the music colleges, you never know who is going to recommend you for a gig. All of your lecturers are going to be working musicians. Speaking as somebody who has taught at a music college, I have recommended a couple of my students for various gigs, not huge gigs or anything like that, but just work, paid work. That's what we want to do at the end of the day. And the people I recommend, not only are they great players, but they're people who would turn up to their lectures and conduct themselves in a professional manner, rather than, somebody who kind of turns up maybe once every semester and kind of sits at the back and falls asleep. It doesn't matter how good you are as a guitarist, your lecturer is going to be far less likely to recommend you for any kind of Dep work if you're that person. So I would say bear that in mind. Turn up to your lectures. It's your degree. It's your qualification. So that's purely from an academic standpoint. Just to kind of add to that, don't be a vulture. Now, this is something that everyone has been guilty of at some point in their career. I was accused of this at one point in my career, and there are two very, very different sides to that particular story. I won't elaborate. But I can think of a couple of situations in which I was asked to play with a certain artist. I wasn't sure at the time whether or not I could do it for kind of various reasons, schedule reasons, if my memory serves me correctly. And a friend of mine who's a guitarist who's kind of known for being a little bit kind of aggressive when it comes to getting work, he said to me, "Well, if you don't do it, I'll do it. Don't tread on people's toes. Don't bolsh or vulture your way into someone else's gig." I mean, that's kind of just elaborating from the, if you ever need a Dep scenario. But I would say that, that's not really going to paint you in a particularly good light. When it comes to most work that you get, and you've probably heard this before, but who you are, how you conduct yourself is of equal, if not more importance than how you play. No one's going to care how well you can play if you're not a good person to be around. And that personality type, being a good person to be around, that's gonna vary from one band to the next. If you joined the next Motley Crue, their version of someone who's good to be around is going to be very, very different to if you toured with a kind of clean cut pop artist. So it doesn't mean, you know, conduct yourself like a choir boy at all times. What that means is, you know, there's so much downtime on tour. So, you know, you need to fit in with the personalities of the people in a band, you know, whether that means having a good sense of humor, whether that means keeping your mouth shut. You know, you can't train yourself to fit any particular archetype, but you will hopefully find some work with like-minded people. And remember, when you get the gig, be nice to everybody. You know, be nice to not just the people who are kind of paying your wages, or the musical director or the manager, but, you know, be nice to the sound guys, be nice to the lighting crew, the caterers, everybody, because you never know who is going to recommend you for other work. It's invariably not going to be another guitarist or another person who plays the same instrument as you who's going to recommend you for the next gig. A lot of the time it could be a tour manager, it could be a sound engineer. You know, sound engineers get to hear you night after night, so they're going to know whether you hit the drums too hard, especially if you're not a drummer. Every band has a difficult member, and if yours doesn't, it's probably you. When you get the gig, make sure you learn the gig inside out. Make sure you learn the set inside out. You can play it in your sleep. You can play it, you know, standing up with all your patch changes, you know, because once you get under the lights and once you get all of the variables that are going to kind of hit you in a live situation, you know, you need to be kind of ready for that. You need to be bulletproof for that. So, you know, turn up to your first rehearsal being able to play in your sleep. You might still be asleep when you turn up to your first rehearsal. You never know. If you do write to a professional musician and ask for advice and they're gracious enough to respond, thank them for their time. Don't just send a thumbs up emoji. That's happened to me before, where someone has contacted me and I've sent paragraphs of you know, helpful, of what I consider to be helpful advice, and it's either been tumbleweed at the end or just a little kind of thumbs up. So, you know, think about that. That's definitely something to consider. In fact, communication skills are very, very important. I know a couple of musical directors who really, really value communication skills. You know, if you get an email from someone asking for your availability for Dep work or for a tour or to discuss the arrangement of a track, sometimes it can't be avoided if you can't respond straight away, but do respond as soon as you can, because this is your career. You know, you want to be known as the person who responds to their emails. The other thing I will say is, don't put anything incriminating in writing ever. You know, people have a habit of replying to all. You know, you might get a message from somebody and you might put a snarky response or something that you consider to be humorous, that it could be a joke that you only share with that person, and they could hit reply to all, and all of a sudden you've made yourself look like, you know, an idiot. Don't put anything in writing that you wouldn't say to somebody's face on a professional level. I hope I'm not coming across as condescending in this video. This is just, you know, some advice that I think if I'd heard some of this maybe 20 years ago, then I could have saved myself from some embarrassing situations. The other thing I would say when it comes to work is, don't be a yes man or a yes person just for the sake of saying yes to everything and then double dep gigs. I know some people who are guilty of this, where they'll be offered work, they'll say yes to everything. If they get a diary clash and they take the better paid job that night, they will then double dep. We call it a dep in the UK, you might call it a sub in the US, but they'll double dep the gig to somebody else. And then, you know, that person has the embarrassment of turning up to the gig with a band that they've never met before, and they're expecting somebody else. It's not very good etiquette to do that. So don't say yes to everything just to fill your diary. Make sure you are available, you know, when you're offered the gig. Now, endorsement deals. Everyone likes to get stuff at a discounted price, or they like to get stuff for free. Now, getting stuff for free is very, very rare these days. If you're lucky enough to be sent a pedal or a guitar or an amp or something for free, then you're very, very lucky. And even if you are, sometimes that comes with a price. Sometimes that could tie you to that particular company, and then you may be expected to make a certain amount of promotional videos that you didn't sign up for. So I would say, beware of companies bearing gifts sometimes. Some endorsement deals aren't really worth it just to say, I've got an endorsement with, such and such a brand. They might not save you money in the long run, or they might cost you a lot of time in the long run. That's not exclusive to all deals. I've been very fortunate to be involved with some great companies. On a side note, if you have a friend who has an endorsement deal with a company, don't ask them to get you a guitar or an effects processor with that company. It's going to put them in a really embarrassing situation. It's happened with me before. I'm left-handed, and someone has asked me a right-handed person has asked me to get them a guitar through my contact with the company, and to pass it off as my own guitar. Little things like that. It's not going to paint you in a very good light if you do that. That does kind of fall into the kind of vulturism side of things a little bit as well. The other thing I will say is think about your professional identity. If you're a quote-unquote session musician, whatever that means these days, you can't possibly be expected to play every single style absolutely brilliantly. So, make a list of the sort of player you are. I mean, I've kind of got my foot tentatively in kind of, I've got one foot in the kind of blues rock camp, and one foot in the, and I hesitant to say shred camp, but, I kind of dabble in that. I kind of dabble with a bit of fusion, I suppose. But I would say my strong point really is the live side of things, and being able to play something appropriate for the song, being able to memorize long arrangements, to actually put in a performance and to actually look like I'm enjoying it, and I am enjoying it, but to actually kind of perform. That's kind of, I think, the reason why I've got work in the past. Also, the ability to sing a bit of backing vocals, maybe, if that's your thing. This is going to differ from person to person. You might just be, that shred person, and that might be what is needed for the gig. So really think about your professional identity. Image falls into that a little bit, and I don't mean image in you have to look a certain way. I mean, look at me. There's no set way to look. The way you look, the way you dress, is going to fit in with a certain brand. It's going to fit in with a certain band. A certain aesthetic. But you can kind of make a judgment call as to would my face fit for this particular band, for this particular act. I've been surprised sometimes. I've kind of thought that my appearance might not be suited to a particular act, and it actually has. People will listen with their eyes a lot of the time. That applies to performance as well. People would much rather see somebody who's animated on stage and looking like they want to be there than just kind of standing stock still. There are kind of varying degrees to that. You might not want to kind of run across the stage and do windmills on certain gigs. You want to kind of stay in your lane sometimes as well, of course. And ultimately as well, there are all these things that aren't that are difficult to kind of quantify, like vibe. You can't put a price on vibe, and that sounds really kind of far out, but certain people have a certain what they used to call X Factor before it became a trite TV show. That's difficult to kind of quantify, and you might be that person for that gig. The other thing I would say is if you are younger, you may be in your 20s or early 30s, and you're kind of coming into the business, and it might be your first tour, and you're working with people who are older than you. Under no circumstances should you call anyone a boomer. Just a couple of points, just from kind of personal experience. I'll leave it there. I haven't played a single note, but hopefully you'll find that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And I'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye.